welcome everyone. Good day. Thank you for joining us. Sandeep here, along with my co-host Vivek, for our final Security Sandbox webisode for the year. Thank you again for taking the time to join us. Hope everyone has had an exciting and interesting cybersecurity year like we have. And we've got a lot of great material to review today. We've got a bunch of things just outlining how 2024 went. And then we've got some interesting predictions and insight looking forward into 2025. Vivek?
Excellent. As always, welcome everyone. And as you can see, we are in end of the year festive mode already. So, it's always exciting to talk about what happened during the year and what we could be expecting in the near future. So that said, let's get started. So Sandy, I got a question for you. So what have we
Yeah.
seen this year that was totally expected? Hey, here's what we we thought last year that was going to happen in 2024, and that really happened. And what was surprising? So let's start with both.
Yeah. Good question. Yeah. So perfect. Starting with our 2023 predictions, did 2024 unfold that way? I think one of the big things we all talked about in 2023 was the continued emergence of AI and how it was going to impact us both offensively and defensively. I think that one definitely held true. I believe AI had an uptick this year in adoption, particularly from bad actors, from nation states, from things like that. We've got a lot of instances all throughout the year, starting with attacks that have been specifically curated and targeted to ICS systems. AI was helping with that all along the way. So I think one of our biggest predictions in 2023 was we're going to see more AI, and I think we definitely saw more AI. On the positive note, I think we also figured out a way to leverage AI for the good guys a little bit better to help eliminate things like SOC analyst fatigue and alert fatigue. So while the bad guys are making enhancements and advancements at targeted attacks and getting better at that, I think we're also getting better from a defensive perspective and leveraging these tools to help us work a little bit smarter and not necessarily harder.
Isn't that the right thing, right? Just because someone else is trying to use AI for bad doesn't mean the good guys can't use it either. So, okay, so that's one thing good about AI, right? That we have ways to mitigate some of the negative effects. Anything else? I know we're gonna come out with a very detailed state of the current OT and IoT a report, as we always do twice a year. It should be coming in late January or early February. So those of you that want specific details about what verticals were targeted and what specific ransomware was in play, all those details will be available. But in general, anything particular that you want to highlight about ICS or OT specific vectors or malware or
Yeah,
incidents?
yeah, absolutely. I think one of the interesting things where we saw an uptick was around wireless. And the first kind of wireless use case that came and smacked us in the face was drones. So I thought that was pretty cool that a very popular recreational item had all of a sudden been weaponized in a number of different forms. And now we need something to be able to protect us against things like drones and other airborne and wireless-borne systems. So interestingly enough, I think it's notable that Nozomi tends to move with these trends, and our innovation and development follows closely with what we're seeing in that space. So right along with all of this drone activity and an increase in drone devastating attacks, we obviously introduced our Guardian Air product. And one of the key use cases of Guardian Air is surrounding drone detection and things like geofencing. So I think it's really interesting that as we see these things upticking, we're able to adjust and innovate accordingly and come out with a new feature or a product to help cover that particular addressable market. I think also of note, the other big one to talk about, which kind of aligns with how we develop, is more and more people seeking visibility as close as possible to that level 1, level 0. We've done a fantastic job historically of getting to level 2, level 2.5, even occasionally level 1. But of course, now with the drive to get even closer to those endpoints, we have, of course, built our Arc embedded sensor, which now can sit directly on a PLC and give us information directly from those level 0 field devices. So I see those two parallels in the way that our customer base and our user base are trying to extend their visibility. We are able to match that by building out the products and features in-house. What about you? What do you think of note from the last year is worth mentioning?
The one that I was very intrigued with was not necessarily an OT or a cyber attack, but still it was a supply chain attack. So in the Middle East, obviously we got war raging still. And when I woke up to exploding pagers and then a day later exploding walkie-talkies, started thinking, wow, so oftentimes the reality sometimes is a lot more creative than something that we predict, right? Especially as we go into, some of the predictions for 2025. Oftentimes, when someone has the willpower and the unlimited resources that they can pull off certain things, they would go the full length, right? And so I know in electricity and utilities regulation and in general, across the board, in a lot of OT conversations, supply chain has become a big deal to focus on ever since SolarWinds, ever since previous supply chain attacks. But the kinetic nature of those exploding pagers and walkie-talkies, I think that'll stay with me for a while because yes, they are gadgets. Yes, they are wireless. Yes, they are everywhere and ubiquitous. But we've seen literally the impact of someone not managing their supply chain well, or what advanced nation states can do if they want to pull off something like that.
Mm-hmm. Another
So
great example of the weaponization of recreational / commercially available electronics. So it's crazy what all you need is a little bit of creativity and a little bit of motivation, and it's amazing what you
yeah,
can do with household
yeah,
objects.
yeah. Well, fantastic. So now let's talk about what we think is going to happen in the near future, right? So hopefully not that many drones falling off on chimneys and exploding pagers or whatnot, but at least from a less kinetic attack, let's start with something simple.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe we've talked about AI quite a bit. So we'll briefly touch and move on from there. In general, anything specifically in AI that you think is going to change in 2025 versus what we've seen already in 2024?
Yeah, I think we're going to continue to improve efficiency from a defensive perspective, dealing with large amounts of alerts, large amounts of log files. I think the combination of AI with large cloud-based data repositories, a lot of more people, as we've noticed, are leaning on things like Sentinel and Chronicle and creating their own data lakes. So I think the more data we have and the better the learning models can be, I think we're going to see a refinement in some of that efficiency, reducing even more operator fatigue and allowing us to respond to things quicker. I'm already seeing that evolution. Of course, things like our Vantage IQ, right? That's exactly why we built that. And we've seen the evolution of Vantage IQ over the past year. So again, I think it goes to show the way that our customers are thinking help us focus enhancement and development within the product. And responding to incidents is always top of mind for our customer base.
Yeah, perfect. All right, so moving on from the topic of AI, I have another concept here, right? So secure by design. Everyone that's been in OT has historically heard the opposite term that it's secure, well, insecure by design, that, we don't have secure protocols, so we don't have encryption, but definitely things are changing now, right from CISA promoting secure by design principles to the European Union, with their Cyber Resilience Act and NIS2 regulations. Everyone is focusing on designing something that works. So not just secure by design, but secure by default. Do you see any of that cool things happening relatively quickly, given that these are all much more longer in terms of cycles and bringing new products to the market? Can we expect anything in 2025 in your mind, in your opinion?
I don't know. Things are just starting to ramp up. So I don't know if 2025 is going to be the year for this, or is 2025 going to be the year we talk about it a lot to be implemented in 2026? We know the pace of our industry tends to be a little bit slower than we see in traditional IT, where they're much quicker to adopt new technologies, new principles, new processes, new frameworks. So I think 2025 is going to be a lot more talking about that and trying to figure out how to implement it and pulling together those design elements. And then 2026, we're going to actually start to see some modification of architectures to reflect some new secure design principles.
I agree with you. I think just because we talk about it doesn't mean the architecture or the implementation can be quick. I mean, we typically have seen everything from 3 to 5 year gaps in technology adaptation or adoption, if that's the word I'm looking for, versus available stuff that's just too expensive that people just go back to something that's cheaper. We've seen all kinds of
Mhm.
variations in this. So yeah, I'm with you. So it's probably down the lane, not necessarily today. Um, how about vulnerabilities and managing of risk in an OT environment? Anything interesting that you think that's happening currently or can be expected in 2025 in that regard?
Yeah, that's an interesting point that you bring up. And, all around the world, we've got customers in different verticals, in different industries, with different focuses, all asking the same sort of questions around risk, asset risk, communication risk, device risk, category risk, just risk overall. And I also think it's really interesting that of the vast majority of people that I've talked to about risk, and when we dig deep into what they're actually trying to achieve, at the end of the day, they use risk as a macro indicator of efficacy of a cyber program. So, for instance, if we start down a path of evaluating risk and Q1, our risk is up here, the number associated with it is less relevant than the fact that a quarter later, I better see that risk level down here. Um, it's too many numbers to chase down. So you got to look at it at a macro level. And I think people are starting to use risk a little different than previously and paying less attention to the actual individual numbers and more attention to trending overall, which again justifies some of the budget coming their way to purchase tools to help manage risk. So I see risk and risk scoring as a positive accelerator for adoption for tools like us. At the same time, though, it's a new territory for a lot of these OT cyber analysts and OT operators who aren't conditioned to thinking the way that some of their IT cyber counterparts are. So I think it's going to be very interesting. What are your thoughts around that?
I actually think, yeah, I agree with you. I actually think it's one of those things that'll be even more focused in 2025 as, we always come up with new terms for existing stuff, right? So I think we're hearing exposure management now as a terminology for how people might be looking at vulnerabilities in their system and tying them to their specific risk for the enterprise based on, what they're talking with and what protocols, all the other technical stuff, right? But in terms of managing exposure to the enterprise, in terms of identifying devices and identifying the vulnerabilities tied to them, we're definitely seeing that. Our customers are asking very similar questions in, you know, what specifically can I address today, given that we have resource constraints, we have investment constraints, and of course timing, right? Not everybody can take a month-long outage to fix all the vulnerabilities, even
Mhm,
if that's possible. Um, so they have to prioritize and identify what can be done in a given time frame, right? And then efficiently too. So no one has unlimited time to go through all the vulnerabilities and address them, even if some patches are not ever going to be available. So I think exposure management is going to be something very popular in
mhm,
2025 as more and more vendors such as ours are bringing tools to the market to make it easier to get there, right? Because otherwise, historically, they
mhm,
were working with spreadsheets. So in our world, while spreadsheets are ubiquitous, it's really impossible to manage risk using just spreadsheets for OT
mhm.
environments.
No, absolutely. And to expand further on that, risk isn't relevant unless you have some way to customize it to reflect your environment. We have this conversation all the time with people about compensating controls. Yes, I understand this vulnerability is here on this device, but I've built up compensating controls around it to sufficiently feel that I've mitigated myself or protected myself. So now, how can I tell your system and the rest of the overall matrix that I don't need to consider as much of a high risk element around that? So it's going to be all about the tuning and the customizing. Today's risk scoring is very generic, and one size doesn't fit all when it comes to risk. Even two organizations in the same industry will have very different criteria for their risk. So I think that's going to be the important thing. And of course, as of last year, and into the tail end of this year, we've introduced risk scoring. We've implemented it, we've enhanced it a lot, and we're continuing to trend in the right direction towards what people are looking for. Going
Yeah.
back to a comment you made earlier, just talking about the secure design principles, right? One thing when secure design principle comes up, you can't have that conversation without talking about zero trust, which I think is another interesting element with which we are seeing some resurgence. I was first introduced to the zero trust model with John Kindervag 10 years ago when I worked at Palo Alto Networks. So it's not a new concept, but what's new is zero trust when it comes to ICS networks and OT networks. And the funniest thing of all is, now that I think about it, OT networks and legacy OT networks were the OG of zero trust networks. For 30 years, they remained isolated, air gapped, and disconnected. That, by true definition, is zero trust. It's only now that we are undergoing all of these convergence initiatives and transformation projects, and trying to combine OT and IT and IoT. It's almost like the masters of zero trust in the OT world are being told by the business that, hey, you got to trust us with some of this stuff. And they're like, well, we're zero trust, though. You're asking us to be zero trust compliant, yet you're asking us to break that zero trust to trust you. And then in the event that some of these trusts start to be formed between IT and OT, they have proven as threat vectors and breach points for larger incidents. So I think we've got to find a balance of what does zero trust mean to each side of the house, and how can we collaborate to find where that middle ground is. Because I think trying to adopt zero trust into OT the way it's implemented into IT is not going to work very well. And so we've got to take that methodology and shape it a little bit to fit and suit the needs for OT networks even better.
I agree with you. I think zero trust should mean the same no matter where you are in the industry or in the company, right? It shouldn't be that IT feels like zero trust means something and OT feels otherwise. Historically, we were, I think, a little too trustful within OT, just because, if something were accessible, anybody could manipulate or change things in the environment. However, to get there was the difficult or the managed challenge, right? However, with the increased connectivity, that getting there became easier. So now, if you don't incorporate some kind of authentication or identification or any of these zero trust concepts, it becomes really challenging to mitigate risk.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's pick another topic. One is, well, this is my favorite because it's threat intelligence and OT. So historically, threat intelligence was very esoteric. It was very high level. There were obviously dozens of groups that have been chasing nation states and APTs and naming them all the fancy names. But we've only had a few that were focused on OT, security research, and threat intel was very limited in OT, and most of that was also manual. Now, of course, we got automation, we got AI, we got mixed use, right? IT and OT combined threat intel feeds. So a lot of cool things happening in this world. What are your thoughts on what to expect in the near future on, better intelligence or better managed threat intelligence, or
Mm-hmm.
is it just more information? What do you think?
Yeah, no, you hit a very important topic. Of course, just like with anything, more is better. More threat intelligence is always better. Multiple feeds are going to be better than a single feed. More indicators of compromise are going to always be better than less. But you also said something very important, and that was convergence of threat intelligence. I think something that we're going to start to see in 2025 is convergence of analyst layers. Right now, we're seeing organizations struggle in managing a SOC where they all of a sudden are starting to send all of these OT alerts and OT information into there, and you're having people that are very confused and not understanding what's normal, what's good, what's bad, what's my response action, what do I do here? So I think one of the things that we're hearing a lot of chatter about, and I'm expecting to start to see it unfolding this year, is the convergence of the SOC analyst role, and starting to incorporate more OT backgrounded folks into these environments, provide some more cross training, and start to not only realize the benefits of a combined threat intelligence infrastructure, but also the benefits of a combined SOC infrastructure.
Yeah, I think that also answers the question that we get commonly, right? So when someone is building out an OT security program, they also ask the question, should this go to the existing SOC or should there be a dedicated OT SOC? And almost all the answers have been, you can't really justify having a dedicated 24/7 OT specific SOC, right? To your point, it's a lot easier to cross-train some of the existing SOC analysts on OT, get your tuning done. You mentioned tuning in another context just a while ago. If you properly tune in alerts and get the right alerts to that IT SOC analyst that is somewhat now OT savvy, they can then separate the noise from what's real and then get to the OT people for further forensics or troubleshooting. And that way you can leverage economies of scale, whether it's a managed service provider
Mm-hmm.
that you're going to or an internal SOC. You don't have to
Mm-hmm.
double or triple up your number of analysts. You're using the same analyst now covering across your enterprise as opposed to adding more resources that nobody has, right? It really is a challenge to add
Mm-hmm.
more resources and talent. So I think that convergence of IT and OT SOCs, or the concepts at least, that's relatively due. But yeah, I'm with you. I think that'll accelerate in the next year when more and more
Mm-hmm.
analysts become, multi-talented, right, or multi-skilled, or trained in at least assessing where to start in OT as opposed to, yeah, I don't know what to do with this alert.
Exactly. And it ties hand in hand with, again, we hear this from our customer base. We understand the challenges that they go through, and we are able to respond with new features in the product. So a great example of us trying to keep up with this challenge is when we introduced workbooks, right? So we have the ability now for a SOC analyst, irrespective of what their background may be, when we start to push OT related alerts out into the SOC environment, along with that alert, we can push a playbook for that first responder. And so someone can open up this alert and now they understand, okay, when I get this type of alert, step one, here's what I need to do. Step two, step three, step four. And at least now we can start to provide some of that cross-pollination via way of our workbooks. So yeah, I think it's going to be interesting. Continued convergence, continued transformation across services, across business units, and of course, continued across infrastructure.
Yeah. So moving on from technical topics, I know this is the environment we live in, which is increasing regulations in OT, right? Historically, we were not required in many verticals, many countries to follow typical best practices or some form of managed security program for OT, but that's changed now, right? So starting in Europe with their NIS2 regulations, and of course even in the US with the SEC, being asked to notify. Um, I personally think there's a lot more regulation coming down our lane, one that's already in play versus others that are being developed for certain verticals. What are
Mm-hmm.
your thoughts on what customers might be thinking about or should be thinking about in the near future about incoming or current regulations that are in effect?
It's a slippery slope. Nobody wants to be scrutinized and put under the microscope and be told that they did a bad job in the event of a breach. Yet at the same time, every single operator and business owner out there would be grateful to know if it happened to someone else. So it's one of those things. I would hate it to happen to me, but I'm glad when it happens to everyone else because I learned from it. I think businesses need to be held to a higher level of disclosure. In the manufacturing industry with the OEMs, we're very familiar with this with the responsible disclosure policies that we have, right? It's mandatory to a certain degree, and there's huge implications and ramifications if an OEM or a manufacturer fails to disclose something that can help protect the larger environment. So I think it's got to be the same with enterprises. It's not an opportunity to punish, it's an opportunity to learn. And someone's downfall and someone's series of unfortunate incidents can act as a learning mechanism for everybody to figure out, hey, how did this happen? Why did this happen? How can we make sure it doesn't happen again? And how can we prevent this from happening to us? So I think the industry in general has to just start accepting the fact that we need to provide disclosure when appropriate. Obviously, there's a right time and a right place, but I think there should be some time limits around it. And I think it's a very important part of the security process and increasing security awareness and security posture overall. We have to be able to learn from everyone else's mistakes. This is why we share threat intelligence at the IOC level. If something is discovered in Russia, this is why our customers in America are immediately protected against it, and so on and so forth. So I think that concept needs to trickle down to the enterprise level, and it acts as a learning tool for everybody.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point. And in using this example of Russia, who is currently, waging war in Ukraine, the one thing that, I think is common across the world in our space is politics. We're not into politics, right? Like the countries might be fighting or engaged with, some kind of tussle, but in terms of critical infrastructure, in terms of water and power, obviously as practitioners in OT security, we share information across the world, right? Wherever it's possible, and maybe not Russia as much, like the lack of information, but in general, I think if you find something wrong in one location, usually you find the indicators of compromise and try to bake that into a product with a technology
Mhm.
or a threat intel feed. That I think has been a successful journey for a lot of customers already. The next step, of course, is to your point, regulation forcing them to disclose that something happened in their environment and identifying a responsible party so that they are they make a decision on whether it's an incident or not, or if it's material or not, and then provide enough context so that
Mhm.
the rest of the stakeholders can make an informed decision on whether or not it's relevant. And I think the benefit is right now we don't know exactly what industries, what companies, what size have a more than normal effect, right, based on the revenue. So, for example, during COVID, you knew exactly what countries were more resilient in, maybe manufacturing or supply chain or agricultural products. So, similarly, now I think these regulations are pushing individual countries around the world in identifying where they have significant gaps, right? So, if there's a particular manufacturing company that discloses a breach, but they have 10 other similar manufacturers in the country. Maybe they're resilient. They don't have any problem with putting, stock on the shelves. However, they might find out that that is the number one and only location to manufacture something that the rest of the industry or the country depends on. And now they know that they have to invest there. So I think there is a secondary
Mhm.
benefit to these regulations now that we know exactly what the impact could be if something were to go down.
Yeah, we just got to get over the stigma of thinking this is a punishment and it's a bad thing to this is something collectively better for the community. And that's what we're here to do. At
Mhm.
the end of the day, is to make each other stronger and safer.
Yeah. Well, on that positive note, I think we're near the end of our time. Any closing thoughts?
Just continue doing what we're doing. We are continuing to see a tremendous impact that our space in general is making within cybersecurity. My only words to everyone are stay safe this year. Make sure you get some downtime. Things aren't going to get any easier in 2025, so make sure you're well rested. And cyber defenders, cyber responders, cyber analysts, wishing you all a very happy season's holidays, season's greetings, whatever you celebrate or don't celebrate. Wishing you the best of it all.
Well said. OT security is going to keep us busy for sure. It's been improving for the past many years, so that'll continue. So get some downtime, you all, and we'll see you all in the next year for
Thanks,
that.
everyone. Bye.